it was the kind of great week where I discovered a sort of new artistic tool that I thought I understood. I'm speaking specifically about morally ambiguous characters. This is an idea that I sort of, before this week, could have said, oh yeah, sure, morally ambiguous characters, I can tell you what that is. But after this week, I have a deeper feeling of what that is, and it just goes to this sort of larger moment in my life as a writer and artist right now of expansiveness. If you're new to the channel, my name is Asa Merritt. I wrote 6 sermons, an Audible original starring Stephanie Shu. My background is in screenwriting and playwriting, and now I'm moving into fiction. And on this channel, I'm documenting that, which in some small part is documenting a professional transition, but is really documenting an artistic awakening, learning about an entire new genre, situating myself in an entire new art form. That's how it feels. I've been a lifelong writer and reader, but making fiction, writing sentences day in, day out has been transformative. And nothing is happening as quickly as I want it to. I'm not getting published as fast as I wanted to. I'm not finishing things as fast as I want to. I'm reading a lot, but not enough and not fast enough. But if I zoom out, things are kind of coming together, and it's a really exciting time. Thank you for being here. And part of this coming together has been building structures to improve my art, to improve my craft. And this week's story by Stephen King, The Reach, that inspired this thinking about morally ambiguous characters and how far you can push that idea, was part of our horror story club here on the channel. It's Thursday afternoons. We're working our way through a giant 50-plus story horror anthology, 1 story a week. Great book club vibes. We've got a Discord. It's jamming. Similarly, on this channel, there's a sci-fi book club on Wednesdays. We'll get into that later. And in any event, it's happening slowly but surely. I read that story twice this week. I noted it, read it again, noted it, and I'm so excited right now about depth, so inspired by the idea that I really might have to read 3,000 short stories. That's my goal. It's a number I got up on my wall before writing one good one. The dauntingness of pursuing this is matched by its potential, the potential to be moved by something as simple as a short story, and that very much happened this week. The way these videos are organized, I go through some writing updates, about my own work, reading updates, and then finally a writing tip, something that I kind of took out of this week that I'm going to apply to my own writing, and you might be able to as well. Writing updates, my story Sam, the ghost story about the person who is a lover with a ghost, was rejected by the place I submitted it to, so I now have to take the time to submit it somewhere else. I should have done that by now. Also, that's one thing that I on principle, I want to be sending these things out the next day. The day I get a rejection, I send it out to the next place, but that didn't happen here. I think it's a little bit of sort of the sting has got to the stinger has to get out before I send it again. And I'm hoping that I become like a beekeeper where heck, getting stung by a bee, that's nothing. This is my job. Send it out again. I haven't yet sent it out again, but that's one update. Another update is I'm making progress on a longer short story that's also a Weird Wild West piece. We did a workshop about Weird Wild West fiction, Sarah and I, and had a really good experience writing a 1,000-word Weird Wild West story. And now, I'm trying to go farther into that genre, continuing to read it, continuing to write it. It's about a snake handler. And this particular character is similarly villainous, but good. But I'm trying to push this idea of a morally ambiguous character and not just have it's a good person that does bad things, just really dial in how nuanced one can get with that idea, which I think once achieved makes for a fascinating character that we have trouble forgetting. And that's kind of what's happening for me right now with this woman, Stella, who is the main character of this Stephen King story. Other writing updates. I think that's the main thing. I run a horror collective here in Mexico City called Diario de Terror. We're about to get kicked off there. I build teams of writers. We write short horror fiction pieces, monologues really for the stage. That's coming up. If you're in Mexico City, stay tuned. It's going to be a really good show this year in October. So on the reading front, working our way through short stories. So, I'm mainly pursuing short stories right now as a writer, finding that artistically liberating, finding the feeling of finishing things very awarding, affirming, and inspiring. It keeps me going. And so in addition to that short story by Stephen King this week, I made it through many others. The other book club on my channel, I don't have it right in front of me, is a sci-fi story club. So similarly to every week reading a horror story, we're reading a sci-fi story every week. That's been going really well. The story we read this week was H.G. Wells' The Star, which I learned started an entire subgenre, the impact subgenre of science fiction, which we, numerous Hollywood films I'm sure you have in your radar about, meteor hitting the earth. Somebody started that entire genre. His name is H.G. Wells. Read a lot of Chekhov this week. Chekhov continues to break my heart over and over and over again with his tales of flawed folks doing their best and often failing. He's just such a beautiful writer. I'm grateful to be reading him. What else am I reading? Oh, yeah, so I'm working way through a second collection of Weird Wild West short stories, and I'm listening to this one on tape because these kind of Weird West stories are like fun and poppy, and it's easy to listen to, so it makes for good dishwashing narratives. And I've only made it through the first story of this collection, but it was important, especially as I just am scrambling in the wilderness here, trying to find a voice, trying to find a fiction aesthetic, because the first story of this collection, I was engaging, but I guess it wasn't for me in the sense that it really felt like an action movie on the page. And, when you go and see movies like 28 Years Later or, 28 Days Later, any of those type horror action type experiences, it's kind of like, what are we doing putting this on the page when we can have this viscerally? Video games, I'm not a huge video game player, but I was playing Resident Evil. I got too scared. It was so lame. I'm sitting here trying to be a horror writer and I can't even make my way through Resident Evil. But yes, the visceral experience of visual action and just how that triumphs in comparison to action and fiction. That was my experience reading this story. And so that was useful in this sense of okay, that's a path that I don't necessarily have to try to write because I just read it and I'm not so into that. So where am I going to steer the ship towards the kind of stories that I do want to write? Now, because I would be remiss to leave you without a writing tip, I do want to talk about morally ambiguous characters, how to write them. Now, this is like some high school stuff. Make your characters, have conflicting, sort of moral drives and so on, which is great. But to be honest, any decent character is inherently, for that reason, going to be morally ambiguous. But what I am inspired to try, having read this story, The Reach by Stephen King, is to give a character a realistic relationship with evil that is extremely dark, yet still gives space for me to be rooting for this protagonist, to care about them, to care about their sort of joys and sorrow. Unlike, say, the Joker or some kind of bigger character where it's this is evil. What Stephen King does in this particular story is there's a real world type evil that's not supernatural, that is very dark, but very compelling. So let me just tell you what this is. So this story, The Reach, is about this woman, Stella. She's 95 years old. She's on her last legs. The story is about her dying. By the end of the story, she has crossed this great expanse of ice to the other side where her dead husband has been beckoning her. Her friends are there. It's a story from about passing over. The thematic focus of this story is evaluating whether or not this person has lived a good life. The story tries to engage with this experience that I think a lot of people might experience in their final days when the knowledge of their mortality is particularly acute, and they ask themselves, did I do it right? Was this a life worth living? And part of the answer for this particular woman, the answer is yes. And part of the reason why it's yes is because of the relationship she had with the community she lives in and the moral code. And this is where we get into this super nuanced, rich territory of moral ambiguity. She values her life because she aligns with the moral code of the community within which she lives. So part of the virtues of this community is that they take care of their own. What does that mean? It's a small town. It's an island, tiny community. They bring each other lasagna when someone's sick, but there's more to it. There's darker, deeper things. For example, now a couple content warnings here. We're going to get into assault, sexual assault, and we're going to get into infanticide. I'll put a timer on like where to skip to if those are difficult topics for you to hear about. There are two things that this community does which are essentially lionized in this story. One is the men of the town go kill this man who molested several children. That's the first thing. And even darker than that is an instance where someone in town, the town's midwife, murders an infant. And this particular act is sort of described as an example of the community looking out for each other. What happens is a baby is born. This story takes place in the mid-20th century. There are far fewer medical advances. The social capacity of this island is limited. They don't even get mail from the mainland, and this poor baby is born who is disabled severely, physically, mentally. Its skull is squished. This child is probably not long for this world, and if they were able to survive physically, what's ahead for them is going to be extremely difficult. This child is born into a family that the story makes clear is not capable of providing the needs that this child will have. So the town, the midwife in particular, while the mom walks away crying, at some level knowing what's ahead, the midwife murders this baby. And this is sort of articulated as an example of a life well lived, right? There's some dots to connect there. This is the values of the community, which are her values, which the story presents as values of a life worth living. And just the sort of like looping in that level of darkness, that this is a world in which on some occasions it is okay and actually generous to murder a child, positioning that value upon our main character and achieving the effect of us, even if we're made deeply uncomfortable by that, entertaining this worldview. This is a triumph, I think, and an aspiration for crafting ethically, morally ambiguous characters, a way of situating a self in a community set of values. Very, very, very rich stuff. So to kind of encapsulate this into a tip, I think what I'm telling myself here is to look beyond traditional ways to depict someone's moral weaknesses, or certainly moral fractures where it could go one way or the other depending on how you look at it. And from a sort of writer-reader experience, making the reader engage with that same question, coming up with characters that are morally ambiguous in ways that are deeply interesting, that make us really consider something like, was that the right thing to do on this island in 1950? I don't have the answer there. And I think that when a writer achieves the effect of making us ask that kind of question, it's a really, really rich experience. If you're new to the channel, like I said, Wednesdays we do a sci-fi story club. Thursdays we do a horror story club. And on Fridays, there is a live writing workshop. As I said, for me, short fiction is about finishing things, putting work out there, making things. Being the artist is to make the thing. And on Fridays, we do live flash fiction workshops. I say we, I'm talking about Sarah, my colleague, where we write and complete a piece of flash fiction based on a prompt inspired by a specific submission call, a publication that currently has an open call. So the idea is to have everything you need on Friday to write, submit, and hopefully publish some work. So glad you're here. Please hit the like button if you like this video so that it can get out into the world and we can start sharing this community with an even wider circle. I appreciate you.
And if you hear this, then go and bend your back.